Welcome to 28storms.com. This is your tropical weather update for Friday, July 15th. There are no highlighted areas by the National Hurricane Center in the Atlantic Basin or the Eastern Pacific Basin, but I highly suspect that we will have a code yellow fairly soon here on the west coast of Nicaragua on the Eastern Pacific side. The service map does show that we have a weak 1008 millibar stationary service low located over Nicaragua. We also have a couple tropical waves in the central and eastern Atlantic. As you can see, they're just to the north of the intertropical convergence zone, but neither wave are showing any signs of development. And also we have a very weak wave in the western Caribbean, also showing no signs of organization. And perhaps the most noteworthy feature in the Atlantic Basin today is this stalled frontal boundary that extends all the way from the far North Atlantic westward all the way into the east coast of the United States. Today's graphic cast from the Tropical Analysis Forecast branch once again focuses on the monsoon trough draped across much of Central America. The risk of heavy rainfall and flooding continues, and like I said earlier, we will more than likely have tropical development here in the far northeast Pacific. This afternoon's visible imagery shows that there is a lot of cloudiness over the north-central Gulf Coast of the United States, with that front draped all the way into the western and central Atlantic, although fortunately there's nothing organized at the moment and upper-level conditions are not that favorable for development. Also to the south here, we're beginning to see an increase in low-level spin near the coast of Nicaragua. We began to see this yesterday afternoon, and it does look like the cyclonic vorticity is on the rise. And also, if we look off toward the west in the eastern Pacific, we also see this convective mass, and you can kind of get the idea or overall feeling that all of this is beginning to congeal into one primary low that's going to take a couple days, but it will eventually organize here just off the west coast of Nicaragua. If we go ahead and look at the latest infrared analysis, we see that much of the Gulf of Mexico is quiet, although if we look off to the east coast of Florida, there is a lot of disorganized convection, but it is elongated from west to east along the stalled boundary, and there's also a fairly strong upper-level trough or mid-level trough off the Carolina coast. The one good thing is that that upper-level trough is providing about 40 to 50 knots of vertical wind shear, and there is a very small pocket of favorable upper-level ridging right off the Florida coast, but thankfully nothing is organizing at this time, and none of the models show any development. But this is the feature that we're going to be watching the most as it begins to continue moving off toward the west or west-northwest into the eastern Pacific. If we take a closer look at the central Atlantic, we do see that there is some presence of that tropical wave on infrared satellite imagery, but there's really not that much to it, and the models are not showing any development. And the same can be said out here in the eastern Atlantic, where we are seeing no signs of tropical cyclogenesis at this time. Very quickly, out here in the eastern Pacific, we do see some persistent convection near Manzanillo, but upper-level conditions, along with sea surface temperatures and the dry air, are not going to aid in development here, so we're not expecting anything. And finally, we're looking off to the west of Nicaragua. There's the monsoon trough, and once again, over the next 3 to 4 days, this will most likely organize into our next tropical depression. We're now looking at the 12Z Canadian. It takes that area of low pressure into the eastern Pacific, where it eventually develops this into a tropical storm. As of right now, it keeps it to the south of the Mexican coast, but that's getting into the medium range once we get out to days 4 through 6. Also notice that it does keep the stalled frontal boundary over much of the western Atlantic throughout the period, but there are no signs of organization in this model solution, and it keeps the rest of the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf quiet. We have a developing model consensus for Eastern Pacific development. As we can see, this is the 12Z GFS, and it also takes this system out into the East Pac, and it keeps it far enough off the coast to also develop this into a tropical storm. Perhaps the greatest difference between the Canadian and the GFS is that the GFS is now taking this toward the southern coast of Mexico. That'll be something that we'll closely keep a close watch on, and much of the Gulf, Caribbean, and Atlantic are quiet. It doesn't develop anything along that stalled frontal boundary over the east coast of the United States. If anything, it only develops a very weak low, but it doesn't show any true tropical development into a depression or storm at this time. No Gaps isn't the most trustworthy model, but it also takes that low off into the eastern Pacific, where you can see it's still south of Mexico by the end of the medium range, and it also shows nothing in the Atlantic Basin. We are now looking at the 12Z ECMWF low-level vorticity forecast. This is Mexico, Central America. Off toward the north, this is the U.S. Gulf Coast, this is Florida, and this is Georgia and the Carolinas, just to get a feel of where you're looking at. This is day 1, day 2, day 3. Still nothing organizing here off the off the east coast of the United States, whereas just to the south of Central America we have a developing tropical storm here by day 4, and day 5, we see that this is organized into Tropical Storm Dora, well to the south of Mexico. As of right now, the GFS is the only model that develops that storm and takes it due north straight into Mexico, whereas the ECMWF is also keeping much of the Gulf, Caribbean, and Atlantic basin quiet. It doesn't do much of anything with that stalled out front, and the same can be said through day 6. Again, we do have a small pocket of upper level ridging off the coast of Florida, but as you can see, based on much of the model guidance, it looks like that narrow pocket of ridging is not going to last for long, and eventually it will be overtaken by about 40 to 50 knots of wind shear, so we're really not expecting anything off the east coast of Florida, but as always, we will keep a close eye on things. So that is your tropical weather update for this Friday. Again, the main concern will be Tropical Storm Dora, or at least the likelihood of it developing in the eastern Pacific within the next 3 to 5 days, along with the threat of Central American flooding. We're not expecting anything off the east coast, but we'll still keep a close watch on things. And also in the western Pacific, we still have Typhoon Mayon, and if the continued track still appears to be toward Japan, we'll go ahead and upload a special video specifically for that particular storm for anyone that may be interested. If not, tune in tomorrow afternoon for another extensive video on the tropical weather situation across much of the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific. Have a good weekend.